welcome to Common Sense TV. If the thumbnail of this video offended you, shocked you, or made you angry, it has achieved its goal. Yesterday we celebrated Youth Day in South Africa, commemorating the Soweto uprisings of 1976, where young students protested against an unfair education system brought about by the apartheid regime. But how much has education improved for black students in the last 26 years? This video explores what students like Hector Peterson made the ultimate sacrifice for, and whether we as South Africans have done them proud, or have we tarnished their sacrifices? Are we honoring these students, or are we spitting on their graves? Let's look at an article published by Business Day in 2019, which highlights the inadequacy of school infrastructure in South Africa. The survey shows substandard infrastructure and lack of basic services continue to be barriers to quality education. The government is still struggling to provide adequate school infrastructure, a situation that affects the quality of education imparted to pupils, a survey by the Department of Basic Education has found. Here they refer to substandard infrastructure, lack of basic services. Let's look at some of these lacks of infrastructure and basic services. The findings of the 2017 School Monitoring Survey published show that nationally 59% of schools complied with the minimum physical infrastructure standards. It also found that certain important facilities were not universally available. Only 76% of schools had running water and 80% had adequately functioning sanitation. Now this is where all those pit toilets come from. This is where you find a school of 600 learners and a whole staff of teachers having to use one toilet during the school day. Teacher absenteeism has also been flagged as a major area of concern in the basic education sector. The national average for teacher absence on an average day was 10%. So on an average day in South Africa, 10% of the teachers do not pitch for school. That's not even taking into account teachers that arrive late. Teacher absence in the Northern Cape is at 13%, Eastern Cape at 12%, and it's higher than the national average of 9% for primary school teachers. At a media briefing, Motshega said teacher absenteeism was deeply worrying. Yeah, well, no shit, it should be worrying. It should be worrying that your teachers are not coming to work. We have to do more to support teachers. There's no need to go deeper into the statistics to understand the leave of absence phenomenon, she said. Why not? Why can't we go deeper? I think if we go deeper, you'll find that you have unmotivated, underqualified teachers who have to teach classes of, as you've said yourself, an ideal amount of 40 pupils. No wonder teachers aren't pitching up for school. I wouldn't pitch for school if I had to teach 40 students in every class. Coupled with the fact that a lot of schools are under-resourced, you have to find a way to entertain and educate 40 students at a time, and you don't have the resources to back you up. Yeah, it's no wonder that 10% of teachers are not pitching for school. The report states that not only impacts on learning and teaching, but also on the efficient functioning of schools. Isn't that obvious? Having an unqualified teacher is okay? In 2018, the BBC published an article about the pit latrine situation in South Africa. In 2018, the BBC published an article called South Africa to Eradicate Pit Latrine Toilets in Schools. And in this article, they claimed the following. South Africa's school pit latrines. More than 4,500 schools have pit latrines out of almost 25,000 schools nationwide. Many are made from cheap metal. Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal and Limpopo provinces are among the worst. Eastern Cape has 61 schools with no toilets at all, and 1,585 schools with pit latrines. Neighbouring KwaZulu-Natal province has 1,379 pit latrines in use. Limpopo province has at least 932 unsafe toilets. But you can dispute the exact amount that they are using here, and you can say that this might not be accurate, but the fact of the matter is that there should not be any pit latrines at any school in South Africa. There's absolutely no excuse when you have a budget of more than 200 billion rand a year to use towards education. Let's have a look at the briefing paper from the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference and their Parliamentary Liaison Office. In this report, there are quite a few mentions of inadequate infrastructure at schools. Prime examples that have been reported in the media: the tragic death of 5-year-old Lumkom Ketwa, who drowned in a pit toilet at Luna Primary School in Bizana in Eastern Cape. The death of this young scholar is exactly the same as the one that occurred 4 years ago when Michael Komape fell into a pit latrine at his school in Polokwane. In addition, these deaths raise the broader question of the type of environment children are taught in. Is it sufficiently conducive for them to learn effectively and to develop into young adults with the skills to go on to a tertiary education? And this is a question that we should ask. If the quality of the sanitation in the school is such a way that a small child will drown in a pit latrine, what are the chances that the rest of his school experience will be of any value? Further goes, there is also a problem with facilities that are supposed to be present at each and every school, such as libraries, computer rooms, and science labs. These facilities are often missing in schools in rural areas, and children who do not enjoy access to them effectively receive an inferior education. Some schools do not have sports field or extramural activities such as art and drama, which are meant to be part of the learning process. In the rural areas, the majority of people come from poor socio-economic backgrounds, characterized by poor housing, poverty, and the lack of formal education. Parents may lack the knowledge or confidence to know where and how to lodge complaints and to make the DBE aware of problems at schools. The fact that so many rural schools are in such an appalling condition highlights the difference between them and the most urban schools. In an urban setting, parents and children are much more likely to assert their rights, and there would be ways and means of getting the message to the DBE and of ensuring that some sort of intervention takes place. So basically what happens is there are appalling conditions at these rural schools and nothing is going to get done because nobody's complaining about it. In urban schools, campaigns can be run to make the DBE aware of the issues that they face, something that one doesn't often find in the rural areas. The DBE published the regulations relating to minimum uniform norms and standards for public school infrastructure during November 2013. This was the first time that the government had set itself targets of this nature in terms of school infrastructure, and it was done because the sector acknowledged that the status quo could not continue. The schools did not have access to water, electricity or sanitation. While it did make some progress, the department missed the first deadline contained in the regulations, which required that by 2016 there would be no schools built from inappropriate materials such as wood, mud, zinc or asbestos, and that all schools should have water, sanitation and electricity. Earlier this year, Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts, or SCOPA, heard that the DBE had managed to build only 16 out of 59 schools, provided sanitation at 10 schools out of the targeted 265, and water to 10 out of 280 targeted schools. It was most worrisome that electricity had not been delivered to any of the 620 schools. And on a day like today, it's very easy for us to remember how education was under apartheid, and you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that would agree with how education was done in the apartheid or under the apartheid regime. The fact of the matter is that the current government set these targets for themselves. They allocated the budgets. Nobody can be blamed for what's going on at some of our schools but the government. You cannot blame apartheid. The current government said that they would deliver on these things, and it's nobody's fault but their own that these things have not been delivered. You would think at a time where personal hygiene is of utmost importance, and in a time where personal hygiene has never been scrutinized as much as it's been ever, that the government would prioritize providing schools with the proper infrastructure for personal hygiene and sanitation. Well, that's not the case. A report from Health EU says poor sanitation in schools in rural Limpopo are a threat to communities during COVID-19. This was published on the 1st of May. Limpopo schools are not ready for reopening as water shortages are a barrier in practicing good hygiene in the fight against COVID-19. Running water, safe and clean classrooms, and actual toilet facilities are a luxury for most children attending schools in rural Bembe. They make do with dilapidated classrooms, water shortages, and pit toilets. Here are some quotes from people who were interviewed for this article. Progressive Student Movement President Kabelo Ntekizo says the government has been unable to solve these problems in the last decade. This is a quote from a grade 12 learner. Our school often experiences water shortages, despite having a borehole within the school premises, which might make it impossible for us to always practice proper hygiene by washing our hands all the time while at school. Pupils are usually told that a broken pump is causing the lack of water. Most of the toilets at the school are also broken, leaving the children with no option but to use a pit latrine. The student goes on to say, we always have a shortage of toilets as one has to wait his or her turn at the queue to use the toilet. I do not even feel safe to go back to school anytime soon until a cure for COVID-19 has been found. The situation is much the same a few kilometers down the road at Ravoni School for the Blind. Community pleas for a new school and accommodation has fallen on deaf ears. The same website reported earlier this year a shortage of teaching aids at the school, which caters mostly for blind and partially blind learners. It has forced pupils to share the few old working braille machines the school does have. Now, for a country that puts so much emphasis on providing work opportunities for disabled people, why aren't they providing opportunities for learning for their disabled students? This is not something that you can blame on anyone but the current government. The chairperson of another school, Waterval High, just outside Elim, says, long before the lockdown, we have been complaining to the Provincial Department of Education for them to at least build us toilets, but all our pleas always fall on deaf ears. There is no way we can send our children to a school without a toilet, especially during this time when we are being told to always practice proper hygiene. Where will learners relieve themselves when a call of nature comes at the school, or as the school does not have any toilet? Not a broken toilet, not an inadequate toilet, no toilet. It doesn't have any. The school has 800 children and it has a shortage of classrooms. So you want to tell me that 800 students and the whole faculty do not have a toilet or do not have a bathroom to relieve themselves? Now, a school with 800 students and a faculty of teachers that need to use a bathroom, and there's no bathroom for them to use, where do they relieve themselves? Are they supposed to use a pit toilet? Are they supposed to dig a hole? Are they supposed to use a river? Where are you going to put the hand sanitizer? On the third branch of the fourth tree that's down by the river where you can do your business? There's no way for you to put it. There isn't even a bathroom. You can't even wash your hands, let alone relieve yourself. This is absolutely ridiculous. Mabila Primary School outside Toyando, the school's SGB chairperson, says the school does not have a single working toilet. We are still waiting for the department to send a contractor, but nothing is being done. We also do not have any form of water supply. Hence, we can never support a call to reopen schools. Attempts to get comment from the Provincial Department of Health failed. This is a government that loves to blame what is happening in South Africa at the moment on things that happened in the past. Atrocious things, we can all agree on that. But the blame cannot be laid on anyone's door except for the current ANC government. So here's a media statement from the government. It was released on the 17th of April 2020, where the Department of Basic Education condemns the vandalism of 397 schools since coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. Now, since this was released on the 17th of April, a month later, which is about a month ago, Times Live reported that more than 1,500 schools were hit by vandalism during the lockdown or theft. It goes on to mention each province and the amount of cases that they had. Now, this is outdated, and the total number of schools that were vandalized, there we go. How ironic, the Department of Basic Education misspells the word vandalized. 397, there we go. Basic Education Minister Motshega has condemned the incidents of vandalism, burglary and the destruction of schools across several provinces. The minister has welcomed the arrest of 44 suspects that were arrested in Gauteng for the possession of stolen property linked to break-ins at a school. What about the other, I don't know, maybe a few hundreds of suspects? I think the police were too busy arresting joggers and smokers to arrest the actual criminals in the country. 2 arrests were made in the last 24 hours in KZN. Right. I guess they had time to arrest a few school vandalizers while they were harassing kids that were taken to the beach. We applaud the work done by the police. Yes, that's all we've been doing. We've been applauding the police for their stellar work during the lockdown, and we have not been disciplining them for the gross acts of human rights infringement that they have committed over the last 3 months. But anyway, she said the communities were supposed to be caretakers of the infrastructure that government had put in place for the education of the children. Right. So the community should look after their pit toilets. The community should look after their lack of toilet. The community should look after the non-classrooms and those with. How about instead of the communities be caretakers of the infrastructure? How about the government be caretakers of the communities? Maybe that's the question you should be asking. Maybe that's the statement you should make. It's not the community that should take care of infrastructure. It's the government that should put infrastructure in place and take care of their communities. Amnesty International has also chimed in. There's an article that was published on the 11th of February. This was even before the lockdown. South African education system characterized by crumbling infrastructure, overcrowded classrooms and relatively poor educational outcomes is perpetuating inequality and as a result failing too many of its children, with the poor hardest hit according to a new report published by Amnesty International today. This was a few months ago. And there's a quote: "For South Africa to comply with both its own constitutional and international human rights obligations with respect to education, major change is urgently needed. The current government's constitutional and international human rights obligations." Nobody else's. The current government of South Africa have to meet these demands. The report particularly highlights poor infrastructure in public schools, including sanitation, the death of 2 children that were reported. What about those that did not die but had accidents in a pit latrine or had to suffer the indignity of actually having to use a pit latrine in the 21st century? That's not being reported on. The right to quality education includes having a school where learners are safe to learn and have the adequate infrastructure and facilities to do so. It says the report details how the education system continues to be dogged by stark inequalities and chronic underperformance that have deep roots in the legacy of apartheid, but which are also not being effectively tackled by the current government. So yes, the legacy of apartheid is real. It is a thing. But certain promises were made. Government have not kept these promises. Government said they would put measures in place to promote education, and they have not. While the report acknowledges that there has been progress made since the end of apartheid on widening access to education as well as other aspects, it has identified weaknesses by the Department of Basic Education, such as repeatedly failing to reach its own targets with respect to infrastructure and facilities. In these circumstances, it is not surprising that educational outcomes remain relatively poor. For example, a recent international survey found that more than 3/4 of children aged 9 cannot read for meaning. In some provinces, this is as high as 91% in Limpopo and 85% in the Eastern Cape. Of 100 learners that start school, 50 to 60 will make it to matric, 40 to 50 will pass matric, and only 14 will go to university. In 2013, the government enacted minimum norms and standards for educational facilities, requiring the government to ensure that by November 2016, all schools will have access to sanitation and electricity, and that all pit latrines are replaced with safe and adequate sanitation, and schools built from inappropriate materials such as mud and asbestos are replaced. Yet, as the government's own statistics show, these targets have not been met. They talk about badly maintained buildings here. These included badly maintained buildings that have never been renovated, many of them dating back decades to the apartheid era and even previously. Right, so you're telling me that there are still schools that look the same as it did during apartheid. Schools that were visited by Amnesty International had overcrowded classrooms without basic equipment and materials such as furniture and textbooks, with lack of security exacerbating the problems of vandalism and burglary. The fact that the Limpopo Department of Education says it will take an estimated 14 years to replace all pit latrines in the province's public schools is shocking. This when the school or the government promised that it would be fixed by 2016, and that when in 2018 the Minister of Basic Education promised it would be done in the next 3 years, but the Department of Education in Limpopo says it will take another 14 years. The one hand doesn't know what the other one's doing, it seems. The students are being taught in an overcrowded class. For example, Amnesty International saw many cases of teacher learning ratios exceeding the stipulated ratio of 1 teacher for every 35 students. In one case this was actually double, so one teacher had to teach about 70 kids. According to the department's own statistics for 2018, out of 23,471 public schools, more than 20,000 have no laboratory. Furthermore, 18,000 don't have a library. No wonder the kids can't read. And almost 17,000 have no internet. We are living in the information age, and kids do not have access to the internet. Almost 1,000 schools have no sports facilities. 4,358 have only illegal plain pit latrines for sanitation. Over 1,000 have no perimeter fencing, so anyone can just walk off the street. 239 don't have electricity, and there are 37 with no sanitation facilities at all. I will provide a link to this whole report by Amnesty International. It's about 120 pages where you can see what horrible state our schools are actually in. And then you ask yourself if the South African government is doing right by their youth or if they are letting them down. careerhelp.org.za, understanding matric results. This basically gives you the guidelines of what is expected for you to achieve the National Senior Certificate. Now, we've seen in the media that it's actually ridiculously easy to pass matric nowadays. Let's have a look. For a learner to achieve a matric certificate, they need to get a 3 in a home language. Now, if you want to know, a 3 is between 40 and 49%, so you have to know less than half of what you're supposed to know for you to still pass. A 3 in other or in 2 other subjects. They don't specify which. A 2 in 4 other subjects. Now, a 2 means between 30 and 39%. So if you lack 60% of what you should know, you can still pass. And that's how you get a matric. And this is why a matric certificate isn't worth the paper it's written on anymore. Because you can have a matric certificate without knowing half of what you were taught during school. And that brings us to our word of the day.
Hi, I'm Murray from Sesame Street, and I'm looking for the word on the street. What's the word on the street?
Neglect. Neglect. Verb. To not give enough care or attention to people or things that are your responsibility. Used in a sentence. To neglect your appearance or the house. He neglects that poor dog. He never takes him for walks or gives him any attention. She's been neglecting her studies this semester. Or 16 June is Youth Day in South Africa, where students who took part in the Soweto uprising of 1976 are celebrated. Yet, the current government neglects to provide students with adequate infrastructure to facilitate proper learning. If you found this video entertaining or informative, feel free to like or subscribe to my channel. And this is part of a greater discussion, so leave a comment down below. Stay beefy.